My father always said that the people who came to our restaurant said a lot about our city, and I believed that. For him, tradition and exclusivity were what kept our restaurant open, attracting only those who belonged to that place. And I never questioned his words, until that night. It was a hot Friday at the end of summer, the restaurant was crowded. I was behind the counter, going through my routine, when I saw the couple enter. They seemed out of place amid the outdated decor and the disapproving looks of the patrons. The woman wore a long skirt and a silk blouse, and the man wore an elegant jacket, as if he had just come from an important meeting. But something in the way they looked at each other seemed to say they didn't belong in our place. I lowered my head, pretending not to see them, but I knew someone would complain soon. And, as expected, one of our regular customers approached me and gave me a significant look. "Are you going to do something about this, Jessica? They don't seem like the kind of people your father would allow here." I knew what he meant. This was the perfect opportunity to show my father that I understood and respected the quality he valued so much. It wasn't personal, I told myself. It was about keeping the restaurant as it had always been. Raising my chin, I walked over to the couple, ignoring the uncomfortable voices in my head. "Good evening, but I think you've mistaken the place," I said, with a firm but cold smile. "I think it would be more comfortable for you at another restaurant." The woman looked at me, not saying anything, but there was something in her gaze that sent a chill down my spine. I had never seen anyone so calm, as if they had nothing to lose. The man, beside her, sighed and took her hand. "We're just looking to have dinner. It shouldn't be a problem, right?" he asked, in such a gentle tone that almost made me hesitate. But I stood firm and said, without flinching, "I'm sorry, but we won't serve you tonight." They stood up in silence, and the woman gave me one last look. But it was only after they left, upon hearing the murmurs of the people around me, that I felt something was very wrong. That same night, I would discover who they were, and that would change my life forever. That night, after I had kicked the couple out, I felt a growing discomfort. I convinced myself that I had done what was expected of me, that I had merely protected the environment my father had built. But as I closed the restaurant, I realized that something inside me had changed. The calm gaze of that woman haunted me. It was as if, somehow, she already knew what would happen. Back home, I found my father in the office, reviewing the accounts as he always did. He looked up when I entered, with a proud smile on his face. "How was today?" he asked, and I knew he expected to hear about how I kept the place exactly as he wanted. I told him about the couple and how, without hesitation, I asked them to leave. But as I finished the story, my father narrowed his eyes, thoughtful. "A couple? What were they like?" I explained that they were well-dressed people, but for him, the detail that really mattered was that they were both black. He nodded slowly, murmuring something about preserving the environment, but I noticed he didn't seem as calm as I had expected. He looked at me with a worried expression, as if something in my description had unsettled him. "Tomorrow, be cautious, Jessica. These days are complicated, and it's good not to attract unwanted attention. Our restaurant has a reputation to maintain." I didn't understand what he meant by unwanted attention, but I nodded and said goodbye, trying to ignore the feeling of unease settling within me. The next day, while arranging the tables before opening, I noticed a strange silence around me. The staff, usually busy with their tasks, whispered among themselves, casting curious and apprehensive glances in my direction. When I approached Kate, one of the more seasoned waitresses, she averted her gaze, but I insisted. "What's going on? Why is everyone acting like this?" She hesitated, but then whispered, as if fearing to be overheard. "You don't know who they were, do you? The couple you kicked out yesterday." My heart raced. "What do you mean, Kate? Who were they?" She looked at me with a mix of disbelief and nervousness. "The man, he's a very influential businessman in town. He works with investments and has bought several properties in the downtown area over the last few years. And the woman, well, she's known for her work in underprivileged communities. She runs a foundation and helps rehabilitate small businesses, like ours." I was in shock, my mind trying to process what that meant. I had expelled not just any couple, but important and influential people, people who, in a way, were helping and impacting lives around us. I felt a wave of shame wash over me as I realized the extent of my mistake. That night, I went home with a troubled mind. Every time I tried to sleep, the couple's faces came to my mind, and regret consumed me. I remembered the man's kind tone and the woman's firm gaze. I felt I had made a grave mistake, but the worst part was that I didn't know how to undo what I had done. The next day, while preparing the restaurant, I received a message from an unknown number. I opened it hesitantly and saw a short and direct sentence: "Some doors only open once. Reflect on what really matters." It was as if someone knew exactly what I was feeling, and the message hit me with unexpected force. I knew it was from her, even without a name. The woman whose penetrating gaze and calm demeanor had unsettled me since the night we met. She understood more about me than I did myself. I decided to find the couple that night. After my shift, I got the address of the woman's foundation and went there, trying to muster the courage to speak with her. The foundation was a simple building, without any ostentation, but as I entered, I saw several photos on the walls, smiling children, families gathered, local business people supporting her projects. And amidst it all, there she was, the woman I had kicked out, appearing alongside people of all ages and ethnicities. A receptionist attended to me, asking if I had an appointment. Hesitant, I explained who I was, and, to my surprise, she merely smiled and said, "She's been expecting you. You can go in." I felt confused, but I followed the corridor to a room at the end. There she was, sitting behind a desk, with the same calm and penetrating gaze that had disturbed me since the night we met. I sat in front of her, not knowing what to say. After a long silence, I finally spoke. "I want to apologize. I was wrong to judge you and your partner. I have no excuses, but I wanted you to know that I'm very sorry." She looked at me in silence, and I felt she was examining not just my words but the sincerity of what I felt. Finally, she spoke, in a calm yet firm voice. "You know, Jessica, life teaches us lessons in different ways. Sometimes, the doors we close are not for others, but for ourselves. You closed an important door for yourself that night." Her eyes bore into mine, and I realized she wasn't seeking my regret. She wanted me to understand the depth of the lesson. In that moment, I realized that her influence and power were not about wealth or status, but about a type of spirituality and strength that I did not comprehend. She stood up, and I thought the conversation was over. But before leaving, she gave one last piece of advice. "Jessica, think carefully about what really matters. Sometimes, the true value lies in who we are, not in who we judge ourselves to be." As I left the foundation, I felt different, as if something inside me had broken to make way for a new understanding. I knew I had a lot to reflect on, and that my life would never be the same. That night, I returned home feeling different, as if something profound had awakened within me. The woman I had kicked out of the restaurant not only accepted my apology, she had given me a lesson. And for the first time, I began to realize how limited my world was, restricted by my father's beliefs and values. Her words echoed in my mind. Sometimes, the doors we close are not for others, but for ourselves. I still didn't fully understand, but I felt that she had shown me a truth I was blind to see. At that moment, a desire to change and to understand more about what she represented took root in me. In the days that followed, I began to seek more information about her and the work of the foundation. I discovered that her name was Grace Thompson and that, in addition to being one of the most respected philanthropists in the city, she was also recognized for supporting small businesses and family-owned enterprises facing difficulties, exactly the kind of help my father, with his limited view, had always dismissed. I felt increasingly curious about her motivation and what drove her to dedicate so much of her life to others. I decided to return to the foundation, but this time with a different intention. I wanted to learn, to understand what made a person with such power and influence have such a serene and welcoming presence. Upon arriving there, I was welcomed by the same receptionist, who took me to a room where Grace was talking with a group of young entrepreneurs. She saw me, smiled slightly, and signaled for me to wait. As I watched her guide those young people, I noticed something different in the way she spoke to each of them, as if she genuinely believed in the potential of everyone there. When the meeting ended, she beckoned me with a gesture and, once again, I sat before her. "I'm surprised to see you back, Jessica. It's not common for someone to take an interest in our foundation after a first meeting like ours," she said, with a slight smile. I took a deep breath, trying to control my nervousness. "I want to understand what motivates you. I know I made a mistake by judging you, and I think that by better understanding what you do, perhaps I can also start doing things differently." She observed me for a long moment, seeming to evaluate my words, and then nodded. "The first step towards change is always the hardest, Jessica. Many refuse to see beyond their own beliefs. But recognizing that is a rare thing, and I am willing to guide you if you are truly willing to learn." Grace invited me to participate in the activities of the foundation. In the days that followed, I began to help with community events and meet people who had received support from her and her organization. Among them, I found local business owners, single mothers, young people starting their first businesses. Everyone seemed grateful for the opportunity that Grace had provided them. One of the most memorable moments was during a visit to a small diner on the outskirts of the city. The owner, an elderly man, welcomed us with a warm smile and shared how, without Grace's support, he would have lost his business during a financial crisis. "Mrs. Grace's foundation gave us hope," he said, holding her hand with gratitude in his eyes. "It's not just about money, but the support, the respect we feel knowing that someone believes in us. These words moved me deeply. I had never thought of wealth in this way, as something that could be shared for the collective good, and not just for personal benefit. I grew up in an environment where people's worth seemed to be measured by how much they could spend at my father's restaurant. But now, I saw wealth as a bridge, a resource that could transform lives and create opportunities. One day, while we were talking, I finally had the courage to ask, "Grace, where does this view of yours on what wealth has come from? How do you manage to see beyond material values?" She smiled, seeming to know that this question would come at some point. "Jessica, true wealth lies in what we can give to the world. Spirituality and prosperity go hand in hand, but only when we recognize that we are merely channels for something greater. Money is a resource, but true prosperity comes from the positive impact we create in the lives of others." These words resonated within me with an intensity one had never felt before. It was at this moment that I understood what she had been trying to teach me since day one. My life until then had been built around emptiness, a quest for validation and exclusivity that, deep down, meant nothing. But here, among people struggling to build something for themselves and their communities, I realized there was a true purpose. In the following weeks, I continued to learn from Grace and get involved in the Foundation's activities. She showed me that true spirituality is in empathy, in the ability to see humanity in others, regardless of their appearance or financial situation. That was the true wealth, something my father and I had never valued. Finally, I decided I needed to do something important. I returned to the restaurant, ready to talk to my father. I knew he would resist, but I also knew it was my responsibility to try to change things. "Dad, we need to talk about the restaurant," I started, hesitant but determined. He looked at me, surprised, and nodded, listening as I explained everything I had learned from Grace and the impact of prejudice on our business. I argued that we should open our restaurant to everyone, that we needed to reshape our vision so that it truly reflected values of inclusion and respect. His face hardened, but deep down, I knew I had planted a seed. As I left the restaurant, I felt that I had started something, a slow but important change. For the first time, I felt truly rich, at peace with who I was becoming. In the weeks that followed the conversation with my father, tensions in the restaurant began to rise. He noticed my change in attitude, and although he didn't say anything directly, his demeanor was a constant resistance. On some days, he avoided any conversation about the clientele, as if ignoring it would be enough to keep things as they had always been. But for me, something had already changed profoundly. The idea of serving only those he deemed worthy no longer made sense. I began to notice that while I was in the dining area, the atmosphere was warmer, lighter. I talked to the staff, encouraging them to be more welcoming, to treat each customer as someone special. Little by little, I felt that the staff enjoyed the change. But this only made my father withdraw further, staying in his office taking care of the finances, as if working in the dining area bothered him. At the same time, my involvement in Grace's foundation intensified. With her, I learned the importance of small gestures that, together, made a difference. She taught me that true influence is subtle and profound, a process of transformation, empowering people to find their own strengths and paths. One day, Grace called me to her office. She was holding a notebook and looked at me with a mysterious smile. "Jessica, I've noticed how dedicated you are to understanding and applying what you've learned. That makes me proud. But I know this journey is difficult, especially when we face resistance." She handed the notebook to me, and as I opened it, I saw photos and clippings of newspaper articles that told the story of her own journey. She had come from a humble community, where she also suffered prejudice and restrictions. Her rise was marked by the struggle to break barriers, overcome judgments, and earn her place. She had faced disdainful looks, people who did not believe that a black woman could become a reference in the city. I also faced resistance, Jessica. For some, it is inconceivable that a woman like me could have made it here. But the secret is to never let others' limited vision dictate what we can or cannot do. Her voice was firm, filled with a quiet strength. Her words touched me deeply. I felt that she was sharing with me not just a success story but a lesson in resilience that was preparing me for the challenges ahead. In the following days, my father finally confronted my change in attitude. One night, when the restaurant was already closing, he called me into his office, his expression stern. "I've noticed that you are making changes in the dining room, Jessica. And some people, well, they are not happy. You know our restaurant has always been an exclusive place. Changing that could be costly." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I knew that this moment would come, but I didn't imagine it would be so difficult. "Dad, the world is changing. People want a place where they feel welcomed. Our exclusivity is driving away customers who could strengthen the business, as well as damaging the image we project." He looked at me in disbelief and let out a bitter laugh. "Image? Our image is our legacy. And that's what I'm trying to protect. I won't let years of work be tarnished by ideals you've picked up from that foundation. You've changed since you met that woman. The way he spoke about Grace deeply irritated me, but I held back my response. He was acting out of fear, from a limited view that no longer fit reality. I knew that arguing further could increase the distance between us, but I felt it was my responsibility to insist. I have changed, yes, Dad. But it's a change that can help us. Grace taught me that true prosperity is not about exclusivity. It's about inclusion, about building something that benefits everyone around us. Our restaurant can be a force for transformation, not just a limited inheritance. He fell silent, his face red with anger, but something in his gaze indicated that, somehow, my words had touched him. He mumbled something about thinking it over and returned to his papers, ending the conversation. After that confrontation, I continued with my activities at the foundation, where Grace and I were working on a new project to support local businesses struggling to survive. It was during one of those meetings that I discovered the depth of Grace's impact in the city. One of the young entrepreneurs who had started a small cafe in the outskirts told us that, before meeting Grace, he thought his idea would never leave the drawing board. He described her as someone who turned dreams into reality, who saw potential where no one else did. She is more than a leader, she is like a guide. She helped me believe that my dream had value, he said, with a glimmer of admiration in his eyes. It was at that moment that I realized Grace's true spiritual and social influence. She not only helped people, she brought hope, restored the self-esteem of those who were marginalized, and encouraged each one to seek their own prosperity. And, watching her transform lives so impactfully, I realized that I also wanted to do the same, starting with the restaurant, but maybe, one day, going beyond that. The path to changing my family's legacy would be long and full of obstacles, but now, with Grace's guidance and the determination to make a difference, I was ready to face whatever came my way. After the confrontation with my father, I began to understand that transforming the restaurant into a more inclusive place would require much more than just good intentions. I knew that the changes I wanted to implement would not be easy to accept, neither for him nor for the customers who had frequented the establishment for years. In the following days, I decided to start with small actions, keeping respect and hospitality as priorities. I began to receive all customers openly, without judgments, encouraging the staff to do the same. The atmosphere started to change gradually. The restaurant, once dominated by awkward silence, now displayed smiles and spontaneous conversations. Those who had once felt out of place now began to feel welcome. One day, while arranging the tables before opening, I saw a group of young people entering through the door. They were from a nearby community and clearly had never been to the restaurant before. I felt a slight nervousness in the air, knowing that some regular customers might look at them with suspicion, but I took the initiative to welcome them personally. "Welcome. Do you already know our menu?" I asked with a genuine smile. They looked at each other, surprised but also visibly relieved. We began to chat, and I told them about the dishes and house specialties. After a while, I saw they were more at ease, even laughing and enjoying the experience. Gradually, other groups of customers I had never seen before started to frequent the restaurant, and the staff began to adapt to the new dynamic. This inclusion, however, began to generate a mixed reaction among the old customers. Some accepted the change well, curious about the new diversity, while others did not disguise their dissatisfaction. On a particularly busy night, one of the old customers, a man who had been coming to the restaurant for years, approached me with a disapproving look. "It seems that the restaurant is different, Jessica. I hope you know what you're doing," he said, casting a look of distrust at the new customers. I took a deep breath, keeping my calm. "Yes, we are adopting a new vision. We want everyone to feel welcome and comfortable here. I believe that the quality of our service will be valued by all." He shook his head, mumbling something incomprehensible, and went back to his table. The experience shook me, but I knew that these reactions were part of the change. Moreover, I had the support of Grace and the people from the foundation. Behind the scenes, she helped me understand how to handle criticism and resistance, teaching me to keep my focus on the greater purpose. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice the positive impact of these changes. The restaurant was attracting a more diverse clientele, and the nights were becoming increasingly lively. Customers who had never considered coming before were now occupying our tables, and the atmosphere began to feel more authentic and welcoming. But, on the other hand, my father seemed increasingly troubled. He avoided the dining room during peak hours and spent more time in the office, as if he wanted to distance himself from everything we were building. I knew he felt betrayed, and the weight of that hit me, but I also understood that I needed to keep going. One night, after work, I found my father sitting at one of the tables, a bit lost in thought. I knew he was grappling with the transformation of the restaurant and the change in our family dynamic. Dad, we need to talk, I said, approaching him and sitting down across from him. He sighed, his face visibly tired. I don't understand what you're doing, Jessica. This restaurant was built with a vision, a purpose. And now it seems like you're changing everything. I'm afraid that everything I've fought for will be destroyed. His words were harsh, but I sensed that behind them was fear, the fear of losing what he knew, what he considered the essence of the restaurant and perhaps of his own identity. Dad, I understand that you see this as a break, but in reality, we are creating a new beginning. Grace taught me that the true value of a place isn't in its exclusivity, but in its ability to bring people together. This restaurant can be a connection point where everyone feels welcome and valued. He looked at me, confused, and then said something that surprised me. And who is this Grace, anyway? Why does she have so much influence over you? I took a deep breath, knowing he wouldn't understand the true complexity of Grace and her impact on my life. But I tried to explain what she had taught me, how she had shown me that prosperity and spirituality were interconnected and that true wealth lay in helping others feel worthy. She's someone who understood the power of empathy and inclusion. Someone who built her wealth not just for herself, but for the community, so that everyone can thrive. That's what I want for our restaurant. He remained silent for a long time, absorbing my words. Finally, he nodded, though reluctantly, as if he was beginning to accept that this change was inevitable. If this really means so much to you, maybe I can try to see things in a new light. But understand that I'm doing this for you, Jessica, he said, with an expression that was both resigned and hopeful. That was the first time I felt that, despite all the resistance, my father was willing to open his heart and consider a new perspective. It was the beginning of an acceptance, and I knew that, over time, he could see the value in the transformation. As we closed the restaurant together that night, I felt a new hope for our future. We were taking the first step toward something greater, something that reflected the true richness of a space that united rather than divided. As time passed, the restaurant became a warm and inclusive place. The flow of customers grew, and the diversity of visitors brought a vibrant energy that filled the dining room with laughter and conversation. I felt proud to see that the restaurant, once a closed space, was now frequented by people of all backgrounds, ages, and stories. Every night felt like a celebration of what we had achieved. The transformations began to attract the attention of the local media. One day, a reporter from a community newspaper walked into the restaurant. He had heard about the identity change of the place and was curious to understand what we were doing. We talked about how our restaurant, once known only for its exclusivity, had become a symbol of diversity and inclusion in the city. The next day, the article about the restaurant was published, and his words perfectly captured what I was trying to convey. The old restaurant has become a welcoming refuge, a space where everyone, regardless of appearance or status, finds a place at the table. Jessica transformed what was a symbol of separation into a point of connection. As I read the article, I felt emotional. I knew this was one of many changes Grace had envisioned when we started working together. I knew that with each new person crossing the restaurant's doors, we were building a different future for the establishment. Grace visited me shortly after and was delighted to see the transformation. She smiled as she observed the full dining room and commented, "You created something powerful here, Jessica. The true wealth of this place is now the atmosphere of connection you all bring to everyone." While we talked, a group of local entrepreneurs, who were part of the foundation, approached to greet her and thank her for her help. They also praised the restaurant's new spirit and expressed interest in bringing their own businesses to collaborate with our space. Suddenly, I glimpsed the potential to further expand this vision of inclusion and welcome. One night, while closing the restaurant, I started thinking of new ways to engage the community. I thought about organizing thematic nights, offering dishes from different cultures, representing the diversity that was now reflected in the restaurant. I also imagined community events, like workshops and gatherings, where people could share stories and knowledge. I shared this idea with Grace, who was enthusiastic. She suggested we bring in some of the young entrepreneurs from the foundation to showcase their products during these events. This would be a way to support their growth and also make the restaurant a hub of activity and engagement in the city. With Grace's support, I soon organized the first thematic night, which would be a tribute to the culinary traditions of the African American community in the city. We brought in traditional recipes, live music, and decorations that reflected the vibrant culture we were celebrating. I invited several young entrepreneurs to display their products, from handmade crafts to homemade foods. The event was an absolute success. The dining room was packed, and the atmosphere was one of celebration. It felt as if the restaurant had transformed into something more than just a place to dine. Now, it was an experience, an opportunity for everyone to share and celebrate their cultures, their identities. In the middle of the night, I saw my father watching the scene from a table at the back. He was quiet, his eyes scanning the bustling dining room, the music and joyful conversations echoing through the space. As I approached, he looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of understanding in his gaze. "I never imagined I would see this here, Jessica," he said, with a voice that carried both admiration and surprise. "The restaurant, it's like it has gained a new life." I felt a tightness in my heart. That was the acceptance I had hoped for from the beginning. And even though he still held a bit of skepticism, I knew he was gradually understanding the value of this transformation. "It's just the beginning, Dad. I want this place to be an example of what it means to include, support, and celebrate everyone around us. And I want you to be part of it with me." He sighed, shaking his head with a slight smile. "I think you learned a lot from this, Grace. I never imagined this influence would bring so many positive changes." I smiled, feeling that the seed I had planted in our relationship was finally germinating. My father was embracing the transformation, and now he even seemed proud of what we were building together. After that night, the restaurant continued to grow, with regular themed events attracting people from all parts of the city. We gained recognition not only as a restaurant but as a meeting place where people could experience the diversity of a city rich in cultures and stories. To celebrate this new phase, I organized a special gratitude event for Grace and the foundation, inviting business owners, young entrepreneurs, and everyone who had supported the restaurant. During the event, I spoke about Grace's impact on my life and how her vision transformed our story. Grace was moved, and at the end of the speech, she approached me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Jessica, you managed to turn a dream into reality. But the most important thing is that you transformed your own vision and that of everyone around you." That night, I felt that the restaurant had achieved its true purpose. It had become more than a family legacy, it was now a point of union, an inspiration for the community. And it all began with the courage to open the doors to what once seemed different or distant. In the weeks following the event honoring Grace, the restaurant continued to thrive, establishing itself as a vibrant and inclusive meeting place. The themed nights became a success, each celebrating a unique culture or story, and each event attracted an even greater diversity of people. The restaurant had become a welcoming place where new and longtime customers alike felt at home. My father, now closer than ever, began to actively participate in the events. Although he still maintained some of his reserve, I could see the change in his eyes and posture. He started to talk to customers he might have once deemed distant, listening to their stories and even smiling with them. It seemed that he had finally accepted the value of transformation. With each event, I saw him more connected, as if he finally understood that our family's true legacy was not in exclusivity but in unity. One afternoon, while I was organizing the hall for a new themed night, Grace showed up at the restaurant to visit me. She walked through the hall, observing the decorations and the hustle and bustle, and then came over to me with a satisfied smile. "You did it, Jessica. You transformed this restaurant into something much bigger than just a place for meals. It is a space for meeting, for true connection. I am sure that everyone who passes through here feels the difference." Her words filled me with pride and gratitude. Grace had been a guide throughout this journey, and knowing that she recognized the impact of the work we had done moved me. "Grace, I would never have gotten this far without you. Your vision, your ability to see beyond, all of that inspired me to view the world and the restaurant differently, and I think I can still do more." She raised her eyebrows, curious. "More?" she asked, with an encouraging smile. I took a deep breath, sharing with her an idea that had been growing in my mind over the past few weeks. I want to expand the restaurant's reach. Not just as a business, but as a concept. I am thinking of creating a program to support local young entrepreneurs, offering our space as a platform where they can showcase their products, their ideas. They could participate in the themed nights, using the restaurant as a showcase to display their talents. Grace looked at me with admiration, and I could see that the idea had touched her deeply. "That is a powerful vision, Jessica. By providing a space for these young people, you will not only be helping them but also creating a strong and supportive community around the restaurant. And, with the right support, you can turn this into something even bigger." My conversation with Grace filled me with enthusiasm. In the weeks that followed, I worked to realize this idea, creating what I called the Community Entrepreneurs Program. The restaurant would become a collaborative space where new talents could showcase their products and ideas, share their stories, and inspire others. My idea was for this project to help strengthen the community, offering opportunities to those who might not have a platform to showcase their work. The program started with small events, each focused on a specific area, from crafts to culinary arts and music. The restaurant space would become, for a few hours, a gallery, a fair, or a stage. The community responded with enthusiasm, and soon the program gained popularity, attracting young entrepreneurs from all over the city. Each event reminded me of the power of inclusion that Grace had shown me. Seeing people come together, supporting one another, and young entrepreneurs growing in confidence and experience gave me a deep sense of purpose. I felt that we had finally managed to transform the restaurant into a true symbol of solidarity and collaboration. One day, during one of these events, my father pulled me aside. He was emotional, his eyes shining with a pride I had never seen before. "Jessica," he began, his voice a bit choked, "I know I opposed all of this at first, but I want you to know that I am immensely proud. You have transformed our restaurant into something much greater than I could have imagined. And now I understand the value of this." Those words deeply moved me. I felt that our relationship, which had previously been marked by disagreement and resistance, was now stronger than ever. My father not only accepted the new phase of the restaurant but also embraced it as a renewed and valuable legacy. The Community Entrepreneurs Program gained so much recognition that we were invited to speak at city events about the impact of inclusion and collaboration among local businesses. Grace and I went to lectures, sharing our experiences and inspiring other entrepreneurs to adopt practices of inclusion and social responsibility. The restaurant began to be recognized as an example of innovation and community responsibility, and we received invitations to expand the program to other regions. With the support of Grace and local partners, I began to envision the possibility of opening a second location in another neighborhood, where inclusion and solidarity could reach even more people. And, more than ever, I felt that this dream was possible. With every step, every new idea and action, I knew I was honoring the true legacy we built together, my father, Grace, the staff, and the community. Our restaurant had ceased to be just a physical place and had transformed into a symbol, a movement of unity and respect. In that moment, looking at everything we had built, I felt that my life and the story of the restaurant had merged into something much larger. It all started with a mistake, a thoughtless decision that led me to see the world through a new lens. And now, with Grace's help and the strength of our community, I knew we were just beginning to walk a path of true prosperity, where everyone had a place at the table. A few months after the start of the Community Entrepreneurs Program, the restaurant was more alive than ever. Each event brought new talents, more diversity, and new connections. It was amazing to see how people inspired each other, forming partnerships and sharing ideas. The restaurant had become a place where stories and dreams came to life, and where everyone who walked through our doors felt valued. To celebrate the success and impact of the program, we decided to organize a big closing party for the event season. We invited everyone who had participated, including businesspeople, clients, employees, and young entrepreneurs who now saw the restaurant as a platform for growth and visibility. My father, who had initially opposed all of this, was now among the most excited to celebrate the occasion. On the night of the event, the restaurant was full. The decorated tables reflected the cultural diversity we celebrated, with details representing each of the themed nights we had held throughout the year. There were dishes inspired by different cultures, live music, and a celebratory energy that enveloped everyone present. Grace, my mentor and inspiration, was by my side, watching the crowd with a satisfied smile. She approached me and, with shining eyes, said, "Jessica, you have built something really special here." Seeing all these people gathered, supporting each other, shows the power of inclusion. It is a true community, and that is something rare to find. I felt a wave of gratitude and pride. I knew that without Grace, I would never have transformed the restaurant, nor understood what it meant to be a unifying point for the community. Everything we built together was reflected that night, the spirit of solidarity and collective prosperity she always taught me. In the middle of the party, young entrepreneurs and partners took turns sharing their stories at the microphone. Each one recounted how the restaurant had become a landmark in their journeys. The young man who started selling homemade cakes, the artist who showcased her paintings for the first time, the musician who gained new fans during a themed night, all expressed the impact of finding a place that believed in them and helped them seize new opportunities. When it was my turn to speak, I climbed onto the small makeshift stage and looked at all the familiar faces in front of me. People who perhaps didn't frequent the restaurant before were now our most loyal and engaged clientele. I felt a deep emotion and started to speak, my voice choked with feeling. This restaurant was once just a place where people came to eat and leave. But with the support of each one of you, we transformed this space into something much bigger. You, with your stories and talents, have made this place a true home for our community. I paused, taking a breath. I thank each one of you and, especially, Grace, who taught me the true meaning of prosperity and unity. Grace looked at me, visibly emotional, and everyone applauded warmly. My father, who was among the audience, was also watching me with a discreet but proud smile. He knew how much that change meant to me, and now realized that our restaurant had found a new and powerful purpose. At the end of the event, as people were saying goodbye, I felt a gentle touch on my shoulder. It was my father, looking at me with a proud expression. "You did something incredible, Jessica. I know that at first I was against all of this, but I see now that I was wrong. The restaurant has never been so alive, so necessary for the community. I am proud of you and what you have built. His words touched me deeply. I felt that, at last, he accepted the new legacy we were building together. We hugged, and I realized that that night was not just a celebration of the restaurant's success, but also a reconciliation with the past and a promise of a bright future. Grace and I talked about the future of the program, and she suggested that we expand it to other areas of the city. With the recognition we had gained, we now had the support needed to bring the project to more communities, creating new spaces for inclusion and support for the development of local young talents. As the party ended, I felt a peace I had never experienced before. The restaurant had become a reflection of the community it represented, a welcoming place where people from all backgrounds felt valued and where true wealth was measured by the positive impact we had on others' lives. That night, as I turned off the restaurant lights and closed the doors, I knew we were just getting started. I and everyone involved had planted the seeds of a change that could inspire many other places to follow the same path. The restaurant, which had once been just a business, was now a legacy, not only for my father and me but for the entire city. The morning after the celebration event, the restaurant was quiet, but the energy of the previous night still lingered in the air. I arrived early to organize things but also to reflect on what we had experienced. The success of the program, my father's acceptance, Grace's and the community's support, all of this represented a transformation that, months ago, I never would have imagined. Soon after, Grace arrived to meet me. She carried the same serene spark in her eyes, and her smile reflected the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed something significant. We sat at one of the tables, the empty restaurant around us, and she looked at me with a pride that touched me deeply. Jessica, yesterday was more than a celebration. What you built here goes far beyond the walls of this restaurant. It's a new way of seeing prosperity, of understanding the power of inclusion. I smiled, moved. All of this was only possible because you believed in me, Grace. You showed me that wealth and spirituality can walk together, that true prosperity lies in building something greater that includes everyone. Grace nodded and held my hands. Now, it's up to you to keep this legacy alive and continue expanding this vision. The restaurant's transformation journey was just the beginning. This space can continue to grow and impact the lives of so many others. I remained silent, absorbing her words. I knew she was right and that the restaurant still had enormous potential to inspire others and strengthen the community. The success of the Entrepreneurs Program had given us visibility and support, and now I felt we were ready for something even greater. In the following weeks, I received messages from various business owners and community leaders who had heard about our program and wanted to replicate the idea in their own neighborhoods. Inspired by the impact the restaurant had already made, I decided it was time to expand. With the help of Grace and local partners, I began working on a pilot project to open a second restaurant in a nearby area, where we could continue our work of inclusion and support for young entrepreneurs. Each step of the expansion brought new challenges, but also new opportunities for connection. The young people who had participated in the events at the original restaurant became ambassadors of our vision, helping to spread the message that prosperity is something built in community. Many of them took on leadership roles, helping to organize and promote events at the new unit while I oversaw the project's implementation. On the day of the inauguration of the new unit, we held a special event to mark the beginning of this new phase. We invited community members, partners, and all those who had somehow contributed to the success of the first unit. Seeing the support and presence of so many people reaffirmed what Grace had always told me: true power does not lie in creating exclusivity, but in reaching out and including as many people as possible. During the event, I took the microphone to thank everyone and reflect on the journey that brought us here. Not long ago, this restaurant was just a family business, a place where my father and I worked, following traditions we inherited. But throughout this journey, I discovered that the true legacy we can leave is not in walls or recipes, but in the connections we make and the lives we touch. This restaurant is now a symbol of inclusion, and each of you is part of it. I looked at the audience, where Grace, my father, and several young entrepreneurs were present. I knew that each of them understood the importance of that moment. They were living proof that, together, we could build something much more meaningful and lasting than any individual success. Grace approached me and, in a gesture full of meaning, handed me a small chain with a tree pendant. It was a symbol of the roots we had planted together, and of the strength that those roots conveyed. "This tree represents everything you've created, Jessica," she said, in a soft yet firm voice. "May it continue to grow and inspire many others." I received the gift with tears in my eyes, understanding the depth of that gesture. The tree symbolized everything the restaurant had become, a place of growth, with deep roots and branches extending beyond us, touching lives we didn't even know. That night, as I looked at the second unit of the restaurant full of life, I felt that my journey of transformation had been completed. The restaurant was now a reflection of the vision of prosperity and inclusion that Grace had taught me, and my mission was to keep that legacy alive, expanding and strengthening the community with every step. And then, looking to the future, I knew that the tree Grace had given me would continue to grow, not only in the soil of the restaurant but in the heart of every person who crossed our doors. Together, we had created something that would last beyond time, a legacy of unity, welcome, and true prosperity.